The Australian Financial Review.
Hello, I'm James Thompson, Senior Chanticleer columnist at the AFR. Welcome to our weekly news breakdown of all things business, finance and markets. With me today, as always, is my Chanticleer colleague. His stock is rising faster than JB Hi-Fi after a profit announcement. It's Anthony McDonald. How are you, Anthony?
Good, James. I'm brighter than a new 55-inch OLED TV.
Fantastic. Well, this week we look at what Commonwealth Bank tells us about the rise and rise of the boomers. We pick the 5 best stories from the first big week of profit season and explain why Jim Chalmers and BHP should be getting worried. But Anthony, I want to start with a bit of breaking news out of Friday morning. Reserve Bank Governor Michelle Bullock, and it looked like half the RBA team had their semi-regular appearance before Senate estimates on Friday. What did she have to say?
Well, she played pretty straight bat, James, as you'd expect. A bit of explaining the economy, a bit of explaining the monetary policy stance, and a bit of smacking back those questions that tried to get her to pick a fight with the government over the whole
Yes.
fiscal versus monetary policy. From a high level, I mean, she said what they've been saying, right? Inflation peaked at 7.8% in December 2022 quarter, was 4.1% at the end of last year. It's now running at 3.8%. So it's slowing, but it's not slowing as fast as they want. Now, that's a problem because, as Bullock reminded us, high inflation hurts everyone, savers, borrowers, renters, pensioners, you name it. And what's driving it is that services inflation still, same story globally, the goods inflation as well. And worryingly, here's the cost of housing construction, which is going up 5% year on year. Now, she went over the big global risks as well, James, the inflation offshore and China. And I think we'll get to China in a little bit. But I think the bottom line, the takeaway is that interest rates are not going anywhere anytime soon. But James, she also had a very timely reminder for us here on the Chanticleer podcast when she said the future is uncertain and the RBA needs to be humble in its rates forecasts. Now, I was just wondering, what do you make of that, Mr. February 25?
Well, I'm not feeling so humble because I reckon Michelle Bullock is firmly in the February 2025 cut camp. Anthony, I think you summed it up really well. I thought it was interesting that a lot of the questions she got were basically from people, from parliamentarians saying, hey, in my electorate or in my part of Australia, people are doing it really tough. And this is a common theme when a Bullock gets in front of a parliamentary committee. And she's sort of got to say, yeah, I get it, but are they? I mean, we're actually seeing pretty good signs of economic resilience. Wage price index is still pretty strong. Governments are still spending really heavily. And while Bullock you're right, she doesn't want to touch any of that fiscal versus monetary policy argument. I mean, it's a big issue for the RBA. They just can't break the back of inflation. They can't get the economy to cool. I mean, I thought it was interesting. One of the senators pointed out that insolvencies are surging and, made a big thing of that. This is real businesses. And the reminder was they're not even close to pre-pandemic levels. So I think the economy's got a long way to cool. Yes, I do think Michelle Bullock is humbly in the February 2025 cut camp. But again, I just listened to that testimony today and I wonder if you are more right and that the first rate cut maybe isn't till May or August unless there's some evidence that the economy is slowing down or there's weakness in the jobs market, but we'll wait and see, I guess.
Yeah, one thing she did say that caught my ear was when asked about the culture of the RBA, and she said they'd launched a new target culture. Now, I feel sorry for any CEO or management team. As soon as you start having to, design a target culture and launch it and try and run it out through an organization, that's got to be a hard task, right? Trying to design a culture and then get people to actually believe in it. Now, James, you mentioned that there's something that should be worrying Jim Chalmers and BHP. This wouldn't happen to have something to do with the red rocks we dig up in WA, would it?
Oh, it would. It would. I reckon this is a big sleeper story that's starting to get a bit of attention, but not enough. Mm-hmm. You mentioned Michelle Bullock talked about the risks coming out of China. The Chinese property market is stuffed. It is busted. Mm-hmm. More data on Thursday showing the bottom is still not in for the Chinese market. And Bullock said that this is a concern. We're seeing it really vividly this week in the iron ore price, which is now firmly under $100. I think it was down near $93 on Thursday night. And as in futures markets hit some of the lowest points we've seen in 2 years. Now, let's put this in a bit of context. Iron ore was $144 US a ton on January 3. So we started the year with lots of optimism about the Chinese economy and the Chinese recovery and China getting its act together. That optimism has completely dissipated. We had the biggest steel maker in the world, a Chinese company called Baowu, come out this week and warn of a long winter, a crisis in Chinese steel. I'm just surprised this isn't getting much attention in Australian markets. This is bad news for Jim Chalmers and the federal budget. And all the things that we've worried about in China, the property market, the share market, the credit market, they're all going wrong at the same time. But Anthony, I don't detect any great sense of panic about this. Do you?
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it, James? Like that US $50 a ton you mentioned, that's $50 a ton that's coming off BHP, Rio, Fortescue's profits, the government's tax take. But it's funny. You say there's not a lot of panic coming out of China, and it's only a week or two ago that Rio Tinto CEO Jakob Stausholm was telling us not to worry about China, wasn't it, James? And I definitely remember Fortescue CEO Dino Otranto dialing into Fortescue's June quarterly call from China. That was also in July, telling us everything was okay. And I'm pretty sure when BHP's Mike Henry fronts up with the results on August 27, he'll tell us it's okay as well. So I don't know, but it's hard to know what to make of it all.
We should put that in context too, Anthony, because the Australian iron ore miners, they can dig up a ton of iron ore, get it on a ship and get it to China for about $30 US a ton. So even if the price was to go to $50, they're still making pretty good money. At $100, they're making great money. At $150, they were laughing. So there's lots of fat to go here. But I guess my question is, what turns China around? What's the spark? The government seems to be totally prepared to just tinker around the edges without doing much. Now, I'm just not sure what changes this story. So that's the interesting part for me.
Yeah, good point.
Well, Anthony, let's move to our first topic. And on Wednesday, the most important profit result of the August reporting meeting was on deck. And Commonwealth Bank Chief Executive Matt Comyn delivered a $9.8 billion cash profit for the 2024 financial year. Now, this result, as it always does, contained, I reckon, about 200 stories, Anthony. But let's deal first with the profit and the record dividend that CBA delivered. Was it as impressive as it sounds?
It was. I mean, cash profit, $9.8 billion, down 2% on last year when it cracked $10 billion. Now, we knew it was tougher in banking, James. You know, the mortgages war, the economy slowing, the per capita recession, all that stuff. So CBA did pretty well to scrape together a $9.8 billion profit in that period. I mean, just think about it. That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
But the dividend caught my eye straight away. It's a monster dividend, $2.50 a share for the 6 months to June 30. And that takes the full year dividend to $4.65 a share. Both of those numbers, the second half dividend, the full year number, they're both record dividends. Now, James, how can you have a record dividend and a record dividend by, a reasonable margin in a year when you don't make a record profit? That's kind of the question. So, I mean, the answer is CBA's just paid more of its profit at dividend. It paid 79% of its profit out to shareholders as dividends, including 87% of its second half profit. So that's a lot. So basically, nearly all the money it made in the past 6 months, it's returned to shareholders via dividends.
Yeah.
Now, that means CBA's pretty much ramped up the payments to maximum, all right? The board doesn't have much further it can go. And that tells us probably three important things, and which all come back to the same thing. And that's CBA at the moment doesn't really have a better use for that profit. It's not aggressively growing. It's not writing heaps of new loans and needs to retain capital to grow. It doesn't have any big expansion plans or M&A or anything that may need seed capital. Yep. And it's also getting hard to buy back shares because the stock's in the $135-ish mark. And as much as Matt Comyn and the team say that that's approaching fair value, the bank hasn't bought a share above about $120 a year. So it's a bit expensive for buybacks. So, and most importantly, I guess it says we're not about to crash. So, James, I don't know. I mean, I've been saying this for a month or two now. I think that CBA share price is the capital market story of the year in Australia. And the narrative is that CBA shares are wildly overvalued. But James, you made a pretty interesting argument that actually you can see why the bank trades at a big premium to its peer. Can you tell us how that works?
Well, look, I'm with you. It's almost impossible on the financial numbers to justify the premium, but Barrenjoey analyst Jonathan Mott had a good sort of way of summing this up. The hard data doesn't tell the story, but the soft data does. Now, CBA is obsessive about making as many Australians as possible their main financial institution.
Yep.
So I think 33.5% of Australians call CBA their main financial institution. That's a phenomenal number. The next biggest bank has 14.6%. Now you might go, okay, that's lots of Dolomite accounts and, history, and they're the biggest, so what? But that flows through to, in the end, it flows right through to the dividend. So CBA is able to engage those customers better. It's able to invest and get better economies of scale across a bigger customer base. It's able to manage risk across those customers better because it knows more about them, and there's more pools of savings and loans to absorb any issues. It's able to generate more organic capital, which it can then reinvest in its own business and fortify that strength further. And of course, it's able to use some of that organic capital to pay dividends, which gets the share price going and makes everyone excited. So you can see there's a bit of a flywheel there.
Yeah.
It's tech companies like to talk about flywheels, but this is a good example in banking, and it's actually working. The stat I was stunned at, Anthony. Now, you would think CBA's got 1 in 3 Australians as their bank with CBA. You think, yeah, okay, we've done a fairly good job there.
Yeah.
But they are going out and trying to fortify that even more. 62% of migrants to this country are now CBA customers. They must have done a hell of a lot of work to get that. And you can think those migrants will stay here for life. They'll start businesses. They'll have families. They'll do all the normal things that people do. And CBA is hoping that a portion of them at least stay customers for life. So it's an impressive strategy. It's sort of not what you think about necessarily with banks. Everyone says they're customer centric, right? But you can see the way that customer focus actually dribbles down or flows down to the bottom line. So, Anthony, I guess they are looking at that customer base though and seeing some things that are really interesting. And it's so big, it is quite representative. They've been giving us regular updates for a while on the difference between the different generations in Australia and how they're faring in terms of spending and saving. Look, there's no surprises. Younger households are doing it tough and older households are going along quite nicely. But the gaps are getting wider, aren't they?
Yeah, they are, James. I mean, last week I think we said CBA is the number one result you have to watch. And it's because of all these little nuggets of information they bring in, whether that's to distract us from the $10 billion in profits they're making, or they want to contribute to the public debate, or they get bored talking about net interest margins. I'm not sure. It's probably a mix of all those things, but it always brings something on results day. In the past 3 results, it's had a ripper. It's showing us how this wealth divide between young and poor is there. And now we all know the cost of living crisis is going on, James, and the narratives that probably hitting pensioners and oldies the hardest. Well, CBA's turned this on its head. It's data, I mean, based on those 1 in 3 customers, Australians that are banks. It shows us that it's actually the young people that have had to cut back most on discretionary spending and spend more on the essentials of life, while the oldies are spending more on the discretionary stuff. They're going out and having a lot more fun. So it shows that the cost of living is really hitting the young people the hardest. And we joke about it, James. Like, I mean, the funny thing is, it's the over 64s that are doing the best. And they're probably the ones that are the buggers that own the CBA shares as well. So they're benefiting. But, we can joke about it, but it's actually a really serious issue. I mean, the young people, the avocado on toast generation, they're really getting pinched. The higher rents, the energy costs, the transport. And they've had to cut back on the restaurants and the beers and the overseas holidays and the avocado on toast. So, I mean, that's all well and good. But I wonder, James, like, this is kind of an election year, right? Well, there'll be an election in the coming 12 months. Whether this sort of data, CBA pointing out the fact of how the young people are actually the ones that are getting hit the hardest, and it's the oldies that are benefiting, whether it'll actually change the way the political parties approach the election and who they're going to look after. Because I mean, maybe this just shows my age, but it feels like when you go into elections, your focus is a lot of the time on the older people. And it's on the pensioners. It's because that's where a lot of the votes are. But I wonder if this time either party's brave enough to pull out something a bit radical to help the younger generations, just because of how much pressure they're feeling.
I think that's right. I mean, you see these numbers. Savings for 65 and over, up 7%.
Yeah.
Savings for people under 24, down 3.1%. Savings for people aged 25 to 34, down 5.2%.
Yeah.
I mean, these households, there's no fat left.
Mm.
And in fact, they're eating into their savings buffers to sort of keep the household going. I think there has to be some sort of political response. I wouldn't have thought there'll be, big increases to the pension or something like that. We've seen already some changes to superannuation and the way that's taxed. I wonder if we'll see some more. I wonder if we'll see a sense that it's unfair or that there's a lack of fairness, that young people are carrying the burden of falling savings and falling spending, while also working to allow retirees and boomers to live this life where they can save 7% of their income and discretionary spending's running for them at 4.8%. Surely there's some politicians thinking about this and thinking, hey, everyone over 18 votes. Oh, how do we make this? How do we make this need? But what's a little bit surprising for me, Anthony, is maybe it's not surprising, but what's notable is that as tough as these young people are doing it, we're not seeing a big spike in home loan arrears or troubled loans or bad and doubtful debts. They're still historically low. So the pain is not translating to trouble for the banks.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and this brings in ANZ boss, doesn't it, Shane Elliott, who's been really strong on this point that the banks are only really banking the wealthy Australians when it comes to writing loans. Yeah, sure, anyone can get a transaction account and 62% of the migrants go to CBA for it, but the banks run incredibly strenuous credit checks now, and they'll only write loans to what are pretty much the high income earners. So unless you're in that high income or approaching high income bracket, that 100 grand a year or more, you're almost locked out of the banks in terms of getting a mortgage and getting credit. So James, I think like a much better test for how the general person in Australia is feeling is the AGL Energy and Origin Energy, right? So anyone can ring them up and get an electricity or gas account with them. They can't say no to anyone. They're not allowed to. So if you look at their arrears, which are a bit more worrying, that actually I think gives you a better feel for what's actually going on out there in the economy.
Yeah, they really ticked up, but we saw this week bad debts at both those companies. All right, Anthony, crystal ball time. I'm not going to put an RBA type prediction from you, but where does the CBA share price go from here?
You know, if I just put my humility aside for a minute, Michelle, the dividend's coming out next week, right? So the ex-date's next week. So take $2.50 off the share price straight away. Now, everyone, like we said, says CBA shares are overpriced. It's the world's most expensive bank. It's trading at 3 times book value. That's a fact. It cannot keep going up when earnings are flat, when the economy is, flatlining as well. It is leaps and bounds ahead of its 3 rivals. That's also a fact. James, I'm going to say CBA shares will hover between $125 and $135 for the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, I agree with you, Anthony. I think that's a great call. My simple question is, who's selling CBA? Because most people, as you said, lots of lucky people bought these shares a long time ago. They're facing a massive tax bill if they sell it. The dividends are still strong. It's a great place to sort of hide in volatile times. The strength of the business is still good. The management team's executing. So I just think, who's selling? Unless there's some macro shock, I think you're right. We'll see CBA hover around these levels.
Yeah. I mean, one pocket of people that are selling, James, and they're selling slowly. They're dribbling out. This has been a trend that's been established for 10 years now. Other oldies with the tax benefits that aren't earning money, they're allowed to sell a certain amount of shares every year, can actually benefit from the tax situation. So they're slowly leaking them out into the market. They still have to pay capital gains tax because they're not earning income as well. They're not getting double hit. But Matt Common actually brought another fact for us, didn't he? A quite astounding one at results day. And that's he told us that if you bought 400 shares, CBA shares, back in 1991 at the float, they cost about $2,100. Now, if you participated in the dividend reinvestment plan, if you could use the franking credits, that $2,000 worth of shares is now worth about 350 grand.
Wow. I'm sad to say, Anthony, no shares in the float for me.
Same. It'd be nice if another CBA came along, wouldn't it?
Yeah, we can only hope.
For our second topic, James, let's dig deeper into the first week of reporting season. This week, I thought it was a really enjoyable week. It was big blue chip company results every day. We did plenty of CEO interviews, analyst calls, flicked through all the presentation. And while it's all about the numbers, it's all about profit and dividends, earnings per share. It's nice to get to the end of the week and think about what we actually learnt, things like CBA and their baby boomers data. So James, let's try and come up with a list of 5 things we learnt from reporting season. They can be things that are a bit off the beaten track or unexpected bits and pieces that caught our eye. And why don't we start with one that you covered, and I'll nominate it because I thought it was quite fascinating. And something we talk a lot about on the Chanticleer podcast is AI. Now, you found the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It's a company that's actually using AI, and the AI is helping them to make money. It wasn't a software company that sells AI products. It wasn't a consultant promising to bring people AI riches. What was it, James?
It was a online furniture retailer called Temple and Webster. Now, I'm like you. I sort of have been getting more and more skeptical about the actual sort of killer app from AI. I haven't seen it yet, but these guys had a really good example. That they're using about 50% of the stuff they do before a sale and after a sale. So, the writing of copy to describe a couch or a table, and then the documentation that you get afterwards when you've bought something, about 50% of that is being done through AI. And they reckon they're saving $4 million a year by using that technology, or that's the annualized rate of savings at the moment. It's hugely impressive. I mean, this is a company that makes underlying earnings of about $13 million a year. So $4 million is a chunk of change. Now, I don't know if it's generative AI, ChatGPT stuff. I think it's probably step back from that, a simpler form of AI. But hey, this is a real live example. It might actually be happening. So we'll keep our eyes peeled. But Anthony, while we're on the topic of AI, you called Goodman Group the ASX's biggest AI winner, but they don't actually make the technology. They're not out there with a bunch of servers. Surely you found a lesson for us in this result, though.
Yeah, I mean, they had a huge year, James. Biggest contributor to the ASX 200 in terms of points in FY24 outside of the aforementioned rocket CBA.
Yes.
And why? I mean, yes, it's in logistics. Warehouses are great. Rents are going up. Online shopping, all that jazz. But it's actually because they're getting into data centers and they want to get into it in a very big way. It's sort of been a story that they've been trickling out in the past 12 months, and the market's absolutely lapping it up. Now, something I learned from Greg Goodman, who runs Goodman Group, he's the Goodman in Goodman Group. Himself is a billionaire. He's one of the top people in Australian property, done incredibly well. Now, what I learned from him was about the approval processes on data centers, which you need a lot, right? You need to get council approval, power, water, all that sort of stuff. Yep. Now, he talked about the council approvals, and it seems like the councils are ripping him off a bit. I think he feels like he's paying too much to get these council approvals, like literally millions. I mean, the bloke obviously, he's worth plenty, but he doesn't want to give it all away to councils just for their approvals. But what surprised me is that they actually don't mind he reckons councils don't mind having data centers inside their boundaries. Right. I thought that maybe councils might be a bit resistant to data centers, because they're sort of like these big buildings, power hungry,
water hungry. But he says they're actually a very light use of land, as he calls it, in that they don't really create much traffic on the roads. So they don't. So they have these big buildings, but they don't really chock up the roads. So he reckons, as far as councils are concerned, they're just a big building. They don't really impact all the surrounding infrastructure. So he reckons they're quite good use of land. Now I had never thought about it like that, but how would you feel about having a data center near your place? I don't know. Maybe it's a sign for a council that, hey, we've got a bit of a modern local economy in our little area. So Yeah, and if you can extract a few million in approval fees and bring down my rates, that sounds good.
Yeah, true. Now let's go to lesson number 3, James, and we're going to energy markets. Cheap energy is at the heart of everything. Now you picked a couple of nice ones. You had one gas and one electricity. Can you tell us what you learned about energy markets?
I think it's connected to AI and Goodman Group, Anthony.
Mm.
We just need lots more energy.
Yeah.
Heaps more of it. Beach Energy, which is actually part of the Seven Group sort of empire, it had a great chart showing that East Coast gas demand is rising much faster than supply. Supply's dropping right off. We're going to have a big gap in the gas market come the latter half of this decade, and I'm not entirely sure how it's going to be filled. I mean, probably the answer is high prices that might bring on some more projects, but it's not easy to get a gas project up in this country, and probably rightly so. I think Origin's got a similar story. Now, we've had very high electricity prices of late. They have sort of come back down, which is good news. But the demand story here is still what we still need a lot more electricity to do all this energy transition stuff, to run electric cars, electric heat pumps, all that stuff. So we're still facing, again, really strong electricity demand that Origin and AGL and others are going to need to fill. Are they going to fill it through renewables? Increasingly, yes, but they're also going to need gas peaking plants to go with those renewables. We're going to need coal for longer than we hoped. So this is a demand story as much as a supply story for me. We're not quite grasping that the energy transition means you need a lot more energy.
Yeah, James, just while we're on gas, can I just add one thing? I had one of those moments where I was actually brave enough to ask a CEO a really, really, really simple question on gas this week. And I thought people might find this useful. Like, what's gas actually used for in Australia? And I reckon it's split 3 ways pretty evenly. So a third of it is households, hot water and cooking. A third of it is industrial customers, so your big manufacturers and everything that are actually making stuff. And the other third's actually to make electricity on the gas peaking plants. And he said, that bit, the gas peaking plant bit goes up and down depending on the electricity price, and as does the industrial customer use. But, as a rule of thumb, pretty evenly split across those 3.
Yeah, good question. Anthony, you're our deals guy. Was there anything that we learnt this week about M&A?
Yeah, I reckon we learnt 2 things about M&A. Now, the first one was how to do offshore M&A. And we know, as a general rule, Australian companies, domestic champions going offshore is really tough and can often blow up a lot of money for shareholders. So the one that's done it really well is Car Group. So that owns car sales. It's hugely dominant here in Australia. The past 5 years for it have been about growing offshore to conquer other markets and keep that growth coming through and keep its share price going up, basically. So we've seen it. We've seen them do it a few times. Most recently, it's gone to the US. Now, its strategy is you find a market leader, you buy a minority stake in it, you sit for a bit, you decide whether you like it enough to buy the rest of it or not, and then you get full control. And then you can implement all those things, from car sales early on in your ownership. So it gets the business really charging. So most recently did it with this business in the US called Trader Interactive, which is a website for buying and selling boats and RVs. Now, it should be a tough time to be buying boats and RVs, just given that the economy's softer, the rates have gone up. But it's got Trader Interactive really growing. So it's doing well, and that's because it took full control about 2 years ago. It's now implementing all the sales strategies it uses at car sales, and it's just firing. So that was the first lesson. I mean, the second one was AGL Energy. So along with AGL's result, it had a $250 million acquisition, a renewables sort of portfolio, batteries, wind farms, all that sort of stuff. But what I learned is that batteries are the new gold, right? And the recent wind drought, some of the days in Victoria, in the middle of the day, where you've got like 5 gigawatts worth of wind farms, they're producing 100 megawatts of power, like just completely, they're running at single digit type utilization, really poorly. So what all the energy company needs is firm power, reliable power that's always going to be available to the grid, that's there even when the wind isn't blowing and blowing the wind turbines around, or the sun's not shining and filling up the solar farms. Now, the coal-fired power stations do that at the moment, and they're great for it. They're incredibly reliable. They just keep pumping it out, rain, hail, shine, drought, no drought, whatever. They just put energy into the market. So in the new world, when the coal-fired power stations are going to be turned off, that firm electricity can come from the batteries. right? So when the sun's shining in the middle of the day, and all the solar farms putting that excess power into the market, you send it to a battery, store it there, sun goes down, prices go up, then you release the power out of the batteries. So AGL bought this quite big portfolio of renewable type assets, and I asked them what they're most keen on. And while the CEO, Damien Nix, wouldn't explicitly say it, it sounds like it's very much the batteries, because of that firm power. So, I mean, that's sticking in my head. The batteries are what's hot out there at the moment. Now, James, last but not least, number 5. Have you got one last one for us?
I do, Anthony,
Yeah.
and this is a general one. But I spoke to Ryan Stokes from Seven Group this week, and everyone talks about Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway is basically a bet on America.
Yeah.
And that's what Buffett says. You know, we believe the American economy is the greatest economy in the world, and we will always bet on America. There's something similar about what Seven Group is doing. Now, I'm not comparing Ryan Stokes to Warren Buffett, but basically Seven Group is a bet on Australia. And right. Stokes was explicit about this. He said, we think the local economy is phenomenal and homegrown advantage is real. And he's 3 big trends. Mining production. So yes, commodity prices have come off a little bit, but mining production's still strong, and the fleet is aging. The fleet of equipment is aging, which is lots of opportunity for reinvestment. Second one, infrastructure. That between now and 2030, $1.7 trillion worth of projects are in the pipeline. Will they all get done? Not sure, but it's a huge tailwind for the economy. And you throw in property construction that we clearly need to do. That's another good thing. And then there's this energy transition, which is going to create lots of opportunities, lots of bad things as well. But there's a lot of activity going to happen around that energy transition. We will probably need more new gas. We will need to invest in lots of infrastructure and renewables and demand side management stuff. So I thought it was a really positive note. Like, okay, Australia doesn't have that many AI players outside of Goodman Group, really.
Yeah.
But there are some things about this economy that will keep it resilient for a long time to come. So not a bad thing. Well, Anthony, we'll come back after the break and we'll look at the next big moments from profit reporting season coming up next week. And we'll answer a question about McDonald's. Okay, welcome back, Anthony. Reporting season heats up. There's even more companies next week.
Yeah.
BlueScope Steel, Lend-Lease, Suncorp, Ansell, Domino's Pizza, Santos, WiseTech, Stockland, Super Retail Group. Any to really call out there?
I'll go Dexus, property company, new CEO.
Okay.
Very keen to hear what he has to say. Suncorp, how much money is it going to return to shareholders after selling the bank? And what does a pure play insurer look like? We won't actually know from its results, but everyone's going to be trying to work it out. And thirdly, Domino's, big changes coming there, I reckon.
Yeah.
Watch that space.
Yes. On Tuesday in Melbourne, we have the Financial Review's Higher Education Summit. And on Tuesday, Anthony, we also get the RBA minutes from the August meeting. This was the meeting that happened in the middle of that market meltdown that seems a distant memory all of a sudden. What do you reckon we'll see here?
Well, I think Michelle Bullock, she answered a bit of this in her appearance in front of the parliamentary committee today, but she basically said they paid no notice to the market meltdown. She said it's important because what happens in financial markets can spread over into the real world, but she said they viewed it as just a bit of a one-off and just needed to forge ahead with trying to tackle inflation.
Yeah. All right. Big week coming up. If you want to know more about what we're talking about today and a whole lot more, AFR subscribers can sign up to the Chanticleer newsletter. And for earnings season, we're picking out the highlights and the lowlights for our daily wrap as well. So sign up to our Chanticleer newsletter at join.afr.com/Chanticleer, and you'll get all the best bits from this podcast, all the best columns of the week, and a special results wrap every day during earnings season. All right, Anthony, we love questions here at the Chanticleer podcast. This week, our question is from Brendan from Queensland. If you've got a question you want to send in, you can email us at chanticleer@afr.com, or you can send in a question in audio form. Just record a voice memo on your phone, include your name and where you're from, and email it to us. So Brendan asks,
hello, Chooks. Brendan from Queensland here. Long time, first time. Really love the show. was listening to your comments around the potential of a recession coming up, and just before that I had listened to somebody's commentary around the Big Mac index and McDonald's not hitting their forecasted KPIs and the impact that generally has on the market. So I just wanted to know your thoughts on that. Keep up the great work. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Brendan. Anthony, the Big Mac index is a bit of a way to judge how inflation and pricing power is around the world. But Brendan's right. McDonald's had some pretty soft results a couple of weeks ago. And you would have thought that in tough times, we do migrate to the Golden Arches for some comfort.
Well, what happened is, so it turns out customers are trading down, as they call it, to McDonald's. But there's more of the McDonald's customers that are trading down further. So McDonald's is losing more customers than it's gaining from this whole trading down phenomenon. And how's it going to win them back? Well, it's got these cheap sort of value meals, right? It's got $5 meal promotions in the US. Locally, I saw them offering something called a McSmart meal, James. A couple of cheeseburgers, small fries and drinks for $6.95, I think it was. It's interesting, this whole notion of trading down, because, like I said, usually that helps McDonald's, right? Everyone's like, tougher times, the fast food chains that have the cheaper food do well. And on the ASX, we see people play that thematic all the time through KFC franchisee, Collins Foods or Domino's Pizza. But that trading down can also be a bit of a hindrance. As for the Big Mac index, James, I looked it up most recently for July. Where do you think the most expensive Big Mac in the world is?
Oh, I don't know. Denmark.
Mate, well, you're not too far off. Switzerland was the most. US $8, $8.07 for a Big Mac. Norway came in number 3. Australia is number 15 on the list.
Okay.
Which I was surprised. Yeah, I thought we might actually be higher up than that. So yeah, the Big Mac index is, it's just I don't know, it probably started out as a trivial way to compare the power of the dollar in everyone's market, and now it's this sort of closely watched index. So it's just fascinating.
Yeah, Brendan, I'm not sure we can take too much about the chances of an economic slowdown from McDonald's results, but I think what it does say is there's pressure at the lower end, like those CBA figures we talked about earlier. There's pressure on the lower end of of households, and that's really coming through. And I think one of the things that McDonald's internationally, or McDonald's parent in the US, noted was there is pressure on Australian households. I think he said basically we've become too expensive in some of these markets, including Australia. So if there's a reaction from McDonald's to go more value conscious, then the likes of Domino's, the likes of Collins Foods, the KFC franchise, even the likes, Anthony, of Guzmani Gomez, they will have to respond in some way. So it could be a great time to be a fast food aficionado in the next 6 to 12 months, because you could be getting some really good value. Well, Anthony, you might be hungry after all that, so we better let you go. Thanks for a huge week and another big week of results next week.
Yeah, I can't wait to do it all again next week, James.
Terrific. We'll see you next week. If you like the podcast and you want to hear more, consider sharing or giving the podcast a review, as it helps other listeners find us. And don't forget to follow wherever you get your podcasts. At The Financial Review, we investigate the big stories about markets, business, and power. For more, go to afr.com. You can subscribe to The Financial Review, the daily habit of successful people, at afr.com/subscribe. Chanticleer was hosted by me, James Thompson, and Anthony McDonald. It was produced by Alex Gow and Lap Fan. Our theme is by Alex Gow. The executive producer is Fiona Buffini.
The Australian Financial Review.